Welcome to this week's Magnetic Leader Workshop. Today, we're talking about becoming an emotional scientist to stop stressing out. So we are covering, by the end of this, you'll know how emotional intelligence makes you a more effective leader, the 4 components of emotional intelligence, how stress is related to emotional intelligence, and then tangible steps to increase emotional intelligence and feel calm. So first, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence in leadership. Why, as a leader, do you want to increase your emotional intelligence? And Harvard Business Review did a study, and they found that nearly 90% of what sets high performers apart from peers with similar technical skills and knowledge was emotional intelligence. And the reason for that is that emotional intelligence helps you successfully coach your team. So if you want to coach your team, you want to be curious and listen and ask questions. And to do that, you need to be calm. You need to have the emotions that allow you to be present with everybody. Emotional intelligence helps you manage your stress level. When your stress level is high, that can hurt your effectiveness as a leader. Delivering feedback, be able to have conversations that could be contentious, and having that back and forth conversation with still keeping the emotions at a lower level so that there's rational thinking, and then be able to collaborate with others. So that emotion is used to build relationships that's needed in leadership. So, what is emotional intelligence? It's defined as the ability to understand and manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. So there's 4 components of emotional intelligence, and these are created. Yale has a Center for Emotional Intelligence. The director of that is Mark Brackett, and this center is doing lots of research on emotional intelligence and creating programs for leaders, but then also for children in schools to be able to help children increase their emotional intelligence. So the 4 components, and we're going to go into these, are identifying emotions, using emotions, understanding emotions, and managing emotions. So the first one's identifying emotions, becoming aware of emotions and expressing emotions. This is really perceiving emotions, being able to look at other people, their facial expressions, their body, being able to walk in a room and to read the room. If you walk into a room and you have a group and you're starting a meeting, but maybe they just came from a meeting that they're still confused and they're still thinking about, being able to notice that, to pause, to be present and think, is there a conversation that needs to happen before I jump into this? Because something seems off. The mood of the people in the room seems different. Next one's using emotions. So letting emotions influence thinking and matching emotions to the specific task. So if you think about your team and what emotions would be helpful to execute on a project, to be able to plan, to be able to have a strategy session, noticing what emotions would help you be successful at that and what emotions would hurt your team's effectiveness. If you've ever seen, if you've had a leader or a boss or somebody who maybe isn't as effective at using emotion, they might come into a room, there might be disagreement, and their emotion may come out by reacting that to yelling at everybody, to shut it down, to have fear as the emotion. And that's not effective to create a collaborative environment. So that's really that understanding what's helpful and hurtful of emotions for others. And then understanding emotions, discovering what emotions mean. And this is really having vocabulary around emotions, understanding what creates emotions, understanding your own emotions, why we have emotions. This is really a lot of just the education around emotions. And this isn't something that we are taught. They are teaching it now, but if if you're really interested in the science of emotion, the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, they talk about it. But Brene Brown, if you've ever read any of her books, she wrote a book that was released at the end of last year called Atlas of the Heart. And the whole purpose of the book, it goes into so much detail of emotions and stories. And what she found is that when people have more um, vocabulary to be able to discuss emotions, they are more likely to be able to regulate their emotions, to manage their emotions, because they have that vocabulary and understanding of what the emotions are. And the last part of emotional intelligence is managing emotions. So, remaining open to emotions and integrating emotions into thinking. So, emotional intelligent people are very good at managing their own emotions, sometimes managing other people's emotions, being able to stay calm, to calm down a situation when other people's emotions are elevated or their own. And this is something that really was never taught to me. It's something that I have learned in the last 10 years, and it's really something I didn't want to learn. I didn't see the value in learning about emotions, learning about my own emotions, and my stress level was pretty high. And so I started to really dig in and learn about these. But I see now my children learning about them in school. They will come home, talk about what they're feeling, talk about what emotions they have. And so that is being taught to our children. This weekend, I was going to a wedding reception. I was telling my 6-year-old that he was going to see his grandparents, and he wanted to know which grandpa he was going to see. And he described it. He said, "Is this the grandpa that doesn't know how to manage his emotions?" And we kind of chuckled, but my brother-in-law said, "Well, I doubt either of your grandfathers know how to manage their emotions. That's not something they were taught. One grandpa just shows it with anger, and the other grandpa doesn't show a lot of emotion." And so it was funny that this 6-year-old had that language to even know what it meant about managing emotions and what that looked like. So I have a lot of hope for my children that they are learning more than what I didn't learn until I was an adult. So that's emotional intelligence, but I want to take a step back and talk about stress, because stress is a lot of emotions. And so before we can talk about ways that to manage emotion, I really want to discuss, why do we have emotion? Where is this coming from? And that really comes from the brain. So the human brain, we have the primitive part of the brain, and this part of the brain is designed to constantly be looking for threats. It is designed to keep us safe, for survival, and for preservation of all humans. And it does a fantastic job. The fact that we are even stressed, that we are having this conversation, that we're here today, means that our primitive brain is working. It has kept us safe, it has kept us alive. And we want that. But in our society, we don't have a lot of external threats like the primitive brain was really designed for, like the lions keeping us alive if we were going to be chased. And so it's still looking for threats. And by understanding how that is happening in our brains, it can help us really understand stressors, and then burnout. There's a great book called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And they talk a lot about stress and the internal factors, external factors. So there are stressors and there is stress. So a stressor is that thing that is causing our body to feel stress, to have a stress response. This could be the stressor you talked about primitively. That could be the lion that's chasing you. There can be internal stressors, things you hear, touch, imagine. So if you've ever been sitting there and you are thinking about something and it causes you stress, the stressor doesn't actually have to be there. There can be external stressors: work, family, money, time, cultural norms, experience of discrimination. These are all stressors that we experience. And when we experience a stressor, our brain perceives there is a threat. Stress is what happens in our body. It's a neurological and psychological shift that happens in the body when you encounter a threat. This is that stress response. It's where your body is overtaken with adrenaline and endorphins and hormones so that you are able to fight or flight or freeze. Like that is what stress is designed for. It's a positive thing because it's kept us alive and safe. But what's happening is that we are not completing the stress cycle. So before there would be a stressor, you'd have a lion, it would chase you, your body would react by giving you lots of chemicals, lots of adrenaline to be able to run or fight. And then you would either run and you would get back to safety and you'd celebrate, or you would not and you die, and then there's no reason to complete the stress cycle. But what would happen is you would run, you would use up those chemicals. Your body would process all of that, and then you would go celebrate with lots of people that you were able to still be alive and that you were able to outrun or kill the lion. Except nowadays, we don't have that. We have a stressor. We're sitting in a meeting, and so we have a stress response, but we just sit there and we don't react to that. There's social acceptable things of how to handle that stress, but what's happening is we're not understanding that we have to complete the cycle. And so in that book, The Burnout, they talk about that the most efficient way to complete the stress cycle is to go have physical exercise. And if not that, like deep breathing, meditation, laughter, crying, having a release of that emotion. So I like to think of this stress cycle as a chemical reaction. You have the stressor, and this is like a toxic chemical. And then you have the stress. And so you're pouring other chemicals in, just like your body is pouring chemicals into you to deal with that stress, the stressor. And so then you have to process that chemical. You have this chemical reaction happening because you have this toxic chemical, you add more chemicals to it, and you need to process it. So before you can just go dump it down the drain, you need to neutralize it. You need to add things to it or heat it up and have a chemical reaction before it can be neutralized or turned back into a different chemical. So this is just what's happening in our body. You have the threat, you have this toxic chemical, you add other chemicals to it, your body is having chemicals added to it to deal with this toxic chemical, and then you're processing it. You're neutralizing those chemicals, and that's what happens when you go run or you have a release of emotion, is you are processing all of those chemicals that are in your body. So now that we understand why we have stress, I'm going to talk about a tangible way that you can start to increase your emotional intelligence by understanding your emotions, by being able to manage your emotions, and just having more vocabulary around emotions. And I call this the train your brain process. And this is a whole process of how to coach yourself. And I teach this to clients, but I'm going to be talking about just one small piece of this train your brain process today. And it's really tangible steps to increase your emotional intelligence, to lower your stress level, to feel more calm throughout your day. And the idea of this is to really be the boss of your emotions, not the other way around. A lot of people, I know for me, before I learned this and understood it, I really felt like I was being controlled by my emotions, not the other way around. And I really didn't have an understanding or vocabulary of it. So we're going to go into some of what feelings are. And I use the word feelings and emotions interchangeably. So what are feelings? Like, what are happening, emotions, what are happening in your body? So my heart is racing, chest is tight, shallow breathing. That would be like if you are feeling anxious. That's physically what's happening. If you imagine describing that to an alien, they wouldn't know what the word anxious means. But if you described your heart's racing, your chest is tight, shallow breathing, they could understand that. Or feeling angry, right? You feel hot, your face turns red. You feel like your body is puffing up, like you're feeling angry. What are not feelings? I feel like my boss is a jerk and disrespects me. Even though we use the word feel a lot, these are not feelings. I feel like my spouse should know what I want. Still, that is not a feeling. Even though we use feel like, these aren't feelings. Feelings are things that are happening to us in our body. They're one word labels to what is physically happening. Um, some of the feelings list, like anxious, overwhelmed, sad. Most adults, there was a study, and most adults could, if you ask them, how are you feeling? They could name 3 words: mad, sad, and glad. That's all they had to describe the whole range of emotions that they were feeling all of the time. And so you can understand that if you need an understanding of emotions to increase your emotional intelligence and be able to manage your emotions, it makes complete sense why there is a lack of that when most adults only can say 3 things about their emotions. So I'm going to go into an exercise now that is called Train Your Brain exercise. And this is really thinking that about emotions, about feelings. So I did not want to feel emotions. It seemed touchy-feely. It seemed like a waste of time. And then when I learned about emotional intelligence, I thought, okay, well, this is valuable. This is something I should learn. But I didn't have a tangible way to start learning, to start coaching myself, to start really being aware of what is happening. And once I had the shift to understand that the body is just giving you data about the emotions that you are feeling. So the feelings, that the data is your face is hot, your face is red, your chest is tight. You can even feel tingling in your body, in your hands, or you can feel cold. Things like that that are happening because of an emotion, but that's just data. And so when you're feeling those emotions, they can feel big. But if you just think this is just data and being curious. So a scientist is curious. They just look at the data. They're looking for connections. They're looking for what's going on. They're very curious. So I talk about being an emotional scientist because I want you to be curious about the emotions, about the data that your body is giving you, and just think about it objectively like that. So one small exercise to be able to do that, and we're going to do this today, but this is a small part of the Train Your Brain process that I teach my clients so that they're able to coach themselves like I do when I'm coaching my clients. And we're going to go through this now. So just like we talked about emotional intelligence, that's having an understanding of what's happening in your body, an understanding of emotions. And so this exercise, if you can take out a piece of paper, I'm going to ask you a question, and you're just going to sit here and notice, what am I feeling in my body? And how I want you to describe this is really just to see, what physically are you feeling in your body? So for me, I'm feeling warm, right? I'm sweating a little bit. I probably feeling a little nervous. And so for me, like my hands are a little cold, but I'm also feeling warm. Um, I might not, my breathing might be a little more rapid. Like these are things that you can notice in your body. And so we're just going to take a second right now. I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I just want you to pause and just notice, what am I feeling in my body? Okay, so if you've just wrote down, what are those feelings that you're having in your body? Just physical sensations. Physically, what do you feel in your body? And then the next step is naming that emotion. And sometimes you might not have a word for it, and that's completely okay. But think about, what is something that I might be feeling? What's an emotion that may be tied? And this is different for everybody. So Everyone doesn't have the same physical sensations for an emotion. You can go back to that list that I shared a couple slides ago, and I usually have a printout of those emotions and just picking one. I wonder what I am feeling, one of these. So look at the data that your body has given you and then pick one word for that, one emotion that could be. Okay, so now the next step is thinking about when did this feeling start? And this is to start to gain some of that awareness of your emotions because you can start to tie what was the stressor? When did I start feeling stressed? And when did this start? So just for a second, reflect if you can tell when that started and maybe not. So these questions, if you wrote that down, when did that start? Or if not, that's completely okay. But when you start to bring more awareness to what the emotions are, a lot of times for myself, when I started this 10 years ago, for my clients, they're so busy and overwhelmed that rarely do they pause to stop to think, how am I feeling? Except this is one of the first steps to start to increase that emotional intelligence and to reduce that stress level. So start to notice, when are you feeling stressed? And this is the work that I do with clients. I was just coaching somebody before this call who was working through this. And what happens is when you have not completed the stress cycle, when that stress has been building up, when you haven't been aware of the emotion that you're feeling or being able to verbalize that, that can lead to burnout. When that is happening a long time, and that time depends in the level of stressors. But when that's happening, there's this buildup of stress. And in the book, they talk about having all the feels. So when you have this stress and emotion that's just built up and it hasn't been released, it can come out like reacting to it. So exploding in anger or bursting into tears or, physically something happening like a headache or something that forces you to pause. This is all stress that is being built up that the cycle has not been completed. So by understanding this, understanding just what's happening in your body with the stress, then you can start to look at what are the stressors and is there things that I'm thinking, beliefs that I have that are helping me, that are causing me more stress or less stress? And do I want to work on reframing those? Because our bodies are interpreting a lot of threats, a lot of stressors that aren't necessarily threats or stressors to us right now. So if we get an email from our boss and we start to imagine that, that boss is unhappy or upset or doesn't respect you, then that can start to build stress when that email actually wasn't a threat, it wasn't a stressor. And so there's a lot of things like that that our brains are interpreting as threats that when we're aware, we may want to change those to reduce the likelihood that our brain interacts with those as a stressor. So this is the work that I do, once again, that I do with clients. And I work with clients individually and I work with them to increase their emotional intelligence. That's just a very small part of what I do. I also work with them to help them reduce their stress level, to feel less overwhelmed so that they can think more strategically. to spend less time on the urgent and more on the strategic, to feel less frantic and more focused in their roles so that they can enjoy their jobs, but then also enjoy their lives outside of work. And then I also have a group program called the Magnetic Leadership System 101, and that is a 12-week course that goes into a lot of these details too. It is a group program with people from all different businesses or doing it for an entire business, their leadership teams. And it goes into some of these things, teaching them how to coach themselves, be more strategic, giving them processes to be more effective in their ability to lead themselves, their teams, and their organization's objectives. So you can find more at aliciabenson.com. Next week, we're going to be talking about why should someone work for you? Really looking at the why, because employees don't come to work because they want to do the specific tasks. They come to work for the why. They want to know the purpose and how they fit into that purpose. So being able to articulate that and understand that for yourself and for your team helps you be able to market yourself even more to new employees. Oh, thank you for joining me. I do all of this because I believe that every employee deserves to work for a great leader, and every leader deserves the coaching and training to be great. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching this. And I hope to see you next week at Why Should Someone Work for You?